Hello, fellow time travelers. First of all, before continuing, I apologize for any linguistic mistakes. Not English native speaker here. I've always loved Back to the Future. That's the movie I grew up watching and rewatching. So I thought it would have been cool to explain every single timeline depicted in the trilogy, as there is not only the alternate 1985 in Back to the Future 2, but many others. Needless to say, spoiler alert for all three movies. Before starting, keep in mind three aspects about BTTF time travel. Point 1. Time can change and does change. This time travel is not like Harry Potter or Lost, where there's always just one timeline and everything happens in that single line. Here you can create multiple realities by changing stuff. At the same time, there's no multiverse. You can change timelines, but there's always one single existing and active timeline. You cannot jump between different realities. Point 2. Time changes slowly. If you change something in the past, it will take some time for the future to change. For example, Marty interferes with his parents' meeting, but he doesn't disappear immediately. Point 3. The person who travels in time is not personally affected by those changes. For example, Marty does not remember growing up with his cooler parents. Point 4. I realize that these movies are not meant to be analyzed like this, as many aspects of time travel don't make a lot of sense. But it's quite fun nonetheless. So here they are. Twin Pines Mall timeline. This is the original timeline, the one we see at the beginning of the first movie. In 1885, Clara dies. George and Lorraine fall in love after George is hit by her father's car. George does not punch Biff in 1955, so Biff continues to taunt and bully him. And there's the Twin Pines Mall. Doc builds the DeLorean, but he's killed by the Libyans. And yes, Doc here is actually killed because Marty hasn't traveled in the past yet. This Doc dies. Marty takes the DeLorean, goes into 1955, and changes stuff. Lone Pine Mall timeline. New timeline, which is the result of the events that happened in the first movie. Thanks to Marty, his parents become cool. George is more courageous. Biff starts to respect and fear George. Young Doc meets Marty, and this event alone creates a whole different Doc from the original timeline. This Doc spends his following years knowing that he will build a working time machine and that he will become Marty's friend. In this timeline, Marty warns Doc about the Libyans. So this Doc survives. This one is also the timeline where Marty will have his Rolls-Royce car incident in 1985, and where Marty and Jennifer's kids will get into trouble and get arrested. Last important thing, when Marty goes back to 1985 and he sees himself being chased by the Libyans, that one is not the original Marty. He probably is very similar, but that one grew up with the cooler parents, not with the losers. Safe Children timeline. When they go into the future, they change stuff. Marty Jr. is not arrested, Griff is. Plus, Jennifer goes into her future house and meets her future family and future self. So this is another timeline. Nothing in the past changes from the Lone Pine Mall timeline, but the future does actually change. It could be all well and okay, but old Biff steals the Almanac and the DeLorean and goes to 1955, giving it to his younger self. Hell Valley timeline, the actual alternate timeline shown in Back to the Future 2. The events happened in the original 1885, like Clara dying, and many events happened in 1955 still are the same. Marty meets his parents, Biff gets punched by George. George and Lorraine fall in love. Marty goes back to 1985. But in this new timeline, Biff always has the Almanac with him. Between 1955 and 1985, Biff uses the Almanac to become rich and powerful. He kills George and marries Lorraine, and will be shot by Lorraine sometime after 1985. Old Biff returns to 2015 quickly after giving his younger self the Almanac, so that the future hasn't changed yet. That's why old Biff can return to the Safe Children Timeline's 2015. In a deleted scene, old Biff disappears moments after Marty and Doc leave with the DeLorean, so we know that in that moment, the future starts to change. Doc and Marty go back to alternate 1985, and by doing so, they create yet another timeline. As in the original Hell Valley, there were no Doc and Marty around trying to fix things. Fixing Hell Valley Timeline. This is the timeline created during the second half of Back to the Future 2. 2 Docs, 2 Martys. Marty goes to the prom, fights Biff, sees himself playing Johnny B. Good. Then there's the car sequence, and in the end, Marty manages to burn the Almanac. Keep in mind, burning the Almanac does not restore the Lone Pine Mall timeline. In this timeline, young Biff still met with old Biff, still got the Almanac for a day, and he fought with Marty for the Almanac, while in the other one he didn't. In this timeline, there were, again, 2 Docs and 2 Martys, so this is a different timeline. Then, Doc is struck by lightning and goes into 1885, while Marty stays there and meets with younger Doc. West Doc dying timeline. After being struck by lightning, Doc goes into the past. He saves Clara. He writes the letter for Marty, given to him by the Western Union guy. But he's killed by Mad Dog Tannen. In the same timeline, 1955's Doc is carried home by Marty, as we see in Back to the Future 3 opening, and speaks with him about everything that happened. Then they find the DeLorean. Keep in mind, this is another totally different Doc from the Fixing Hell Valley timeline. That Doc, the one struck by lightning, the same one from the Lone Pine Mall timeline, saw Marty disappear with the DeLorean in 1955, Back to the Future 1, and stop. He never saw him again until his birth. Until their first meeting. This new Doc instead helps Marty once again. The Doc from Back to the Future 3's 1995 is different from the Fixing Hell Valley timeline Old West Doc because of Rule 3. Old West Doc is the one traveling in time, so he's not affected by changes that occur to his other versions. Anyway, Marty goes to 1885, West Doc saved timeline. Marty meets with Old West Doc and saves him from Mad Dog Tannen. Again, keep in mind, in this timeline, Marty still hasn't matured enough. So in the future, at this point, he will still have the Rolls-Royce incident we hear about in Back to the Future 2. Anyway, Clara is saved, but Doc is saved as well. Marty and Doc plan the train stuff, they fight Mad Dog, and in the end, Marty goes back to 1985 while Doc remains in the past. No incident timeline. Marty goes back to 1985. He destroys the DeLorean, and he doesn't have the Rolls-Royce incident. Only now, we can actually say for sure that the future will be different from what we've seen before. But this is not the final timeline, because there's another person now who has a time machine, Doc with his time train. In this timeline, Marty doesn't meet Doc with his family. This happens in the final timeline, so this Doc, the one on the train, is the one from the Lone Pine Mall timeline, the one who helped Marty go back to 1985, Back to the Future 1. But he's not the one we see from Back to the Future 3's opening in 1955. When they meet in 1885, Doc asks Marty who made him wear those clothes. He doesn't remember because those are 2 different Docs, because old Doc was in 1885 when Marty talked with 1955's Doc. Marty will live with his new parents, whom he doesn't know, which is quite disturbing. But his future will probably be better than the one we see in Back to the Future 2. The most disturbing aspect of all of this is that Back to the Future 3, 1955's Doc, knows everything. He knows that he will build the DeLorean, He will meet Marty, he will be shot, he will travel to the future, he will go back to Hell Valley, and he will be struck by lightning and sent to 1885. Above all, he still thinks that he will be killed by Mad Dog Tannen, because he will never know if Marty will succeed in saving him. Great Scott! So here they are, every single timeline depicted in Back to the Future. I hope you enjoyed it. See you. Ciao!